I'm I'm a philosopher. I'm especially interested in discussions in the ancient world. Um, it was really the debates between the Stoics and the academic skeptics that captured my imagination at the very beginning of my
Mm.
career, and it's a place that I'm still kind of living these days. And so there were a lot of Stoic. So with regards to my own work, there's the research work and scholarship on the history of philosophy, but on my
Mm.
own productive stuff, where I'm kind of working out a theory of knowledge or a theory about how we should reason together. It's not just the Stoics that have informed that view. I think that there's I'm kind of more like Cicero in this regard. I'm an academic skeptic first and a Stoic second. I really
Mm.
appreciate the Stoics. I think that there's a deep insight to them, and there's a lot to be gleaned from them. But there's a lot that I sort of have a pretty critical distance from,
Yeah.
and appreciate the skeptical challenges of
Mm.
them, and the certain kinds of academic skeptical attitudes, skills, and comportments are ones that are also, I think, necessary.
Mm.
Partly because of the fact that the Stoics, one feature of Stoicism that that may be a kind of problem is the fact that the Stoics are committed to a pretty hard division between what's theirs and what's not. And
Mm.
I'm unsure that that distinction, again, we might see it most clearly in Epictetus's Enchiridion 1, right? What's up to you and what's not.
Mm.
Uh, the externals and the things that are within your power, the things under
Mm.
things according to you, or up to you according to nature. Um, I'm unsure that that's a sort of a really rigid distinction. I'm unsure that
Yeah.
that's something that, again, I think the more that we know about human psychology, the harder it is for us to maintain that distinction.
Mm.
Um, I think that that kind of control is something that is not really a psychological possibility. Uh, and so the consequences that I think that Stoicism has offers us a lot, but I think that there are a number of features that we need to be able to manage that are sort of prior to being able to exercise those Stoic virtues.
Mm.
Someone like Plutarch recognized this. He said that, like, look, I recognize that there's such a thing, the possibility of the Stoic sage, but every Stoic sage will need to thank fate for making him immune to fate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
some ways, Marcus Aurelius is a great example of that, right? Like book one of the Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, where it's just a big, long thank you list
Mm.
to
Yeah.
all these folks, right?
Yeah.
Uh, that's really a case for Marcus being able to recognize that the inner citadel is not something that he comes built with.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
be something that was constructed. He had, in some ways, to be lucky to be
Hmm.
able to build that. And again, it wasn't that he had to be lucky to have the money and things like that. He just had to have the right kinds of people around him to be good
Yeah.
example. And so he had to have the right teachers. He had to not be tempted to do the wrong thing and develop certain kinds of bad habits before he could be taught how to manage
Mm.
himself.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a sort of a feature of Stoicism that 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 might yield certain kinds of. So here's one very simple one, which is if there really is this distinction, this deep division between what's up to you and what's not, and your mind and your aversions and your inclinations really are up to you, then there's a sense that, like, people who suffer from significant depression or
Yeah.
psychosis are in some ways complicit with that. And I
Mm.
don't think that that's a very plausible commitment.
Mm.
I think that one can manage one's depression with certain kinds of cognitive behavioral strategies, but one cannot cure one's depression with
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
And I think that being able to recognize that is something that as a practicing Stoic, I'm like, by saying all this, I'm not saying boo Stoicism or anything like that. I'm saying that as a practicing Stoic, I need to recognize the limits of my system. I need to
Mm.
recognize that there are places where the ancient attitudes are ones that were rooted in. They came from a period that was they. Seneca was wrong about so many things about the natural world, right?
Yeah.
He thought that in natural questions, he didn't think that rain could get 10 feet under the ground, right? Like, he thought that they thought that the universe kind of ran like a kind of like a clock, and that there was a music of spheres and things like that. That's just not true. They're just wrong about the natural world, and they're wrong about how human minds, how the background clockwork of human minds work. And so look, I think that there are a lot of good lessons. I think that there are a lot of places where Stoicism pays a lot of dividends, but I think that there are limits as to how descriptively correct one of the core features of that system is actually correct.